Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Multifamily Hangout. I'm your host, Adrian Danila, and again, I want to welcome all of you to the live show. Thank you for being here with us today. I want to thank our sponsors for making this podcast possible. So we want to thank Apartment Snapshot, Kairos Water, and GPS Roof Leak Repairs. With this being said, I want to kick it off, and I want to kick it off to Chris. Chris, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian. And it brings me a great pleasure today to invite, and I understand, I believe this is maybe his first podcast. So really awesome to
Right.
welcome Ron Wenzel. Ron has an illustrious career in multifamily and hospitality. He is currently the president and CEO of Vesteco Real Estate Management Services, but he's also had multiple roles, and as he shared, president of the Orlando Association, and spent a lot of time in leadership as well as multifamily and in advocacy. So welcome, Ron. We're really excited to have you on today.
Thank you. It's good to be here. And you're right. This is my very first podcast, and I appreciate it. And thanks for having me.
Well, we promise not to bite, and we ask the audience to be friendly in their questions, but we'll try to get deep here. And I think what I first want to kick it off with, we're very casual environment here on the Hangout, and the first question I want to ask about is if you could share just a little bit maybe about your journey, especially from serving in the U.S. Air Force Reserves to
Sure.
becoming such a prominent figure in the real estate and hospitality industry.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know that I would consider myself a prominent, but I appreciate the compliment. So, I started my career early, 1986. I went into the United States Air Force Reserves as a way to pay for my college tuition, like a lot of guys did or have done, and realized that 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year wasn't going to pay the bills. So interestingly enough, my sister at the time, Linda, who was in property management, working for a company called American Residential Management back in 1986, said, "Hey, Ron, why don't you try applying for a leasing position with my regional manager?" And I did, and I took the position, and from there on out, started my career. So, again, spent 38 years in the industry, started out in Texas, in Dallas, and, went from from leasing agent to assistant manager to eventually property manager. And, worked for some really great companies over the years. Moved into a district manager position, eventually an asset manager. And by the time I was 32, was VP of operations in a Dallas-based company called Wells Asset Management, where I spent 10 years. And just all along, learning more about the industry and becoming involved in the local apartment association has been very key, very instrumental in launching or propelling my career. Having a competitive nature and a desire for education, going through what was then the PLP program, which tells you how old I am. That was the Professional Leasing Person program. I think that evolved into the NALP and eventually other acronyms. And continuing to get involved with the local apartment associations, going through CAM, and then eventually going to CAPS, and then wanting to expand even further. Went to the Institute of Real Estate Management and earned my ARM designation and eventually my CPM designation. All the while learning and, going to getting my real estate license in Texas as well, and eventually my broker's license. And, so I think my career has been all about, not only just, going from position to position, but all the while, going to these various classes and earning these designations and these professional licenses, and also serving as, a volunteer on various committees, starting with the Dallas Apartment Association, then the Tarrant County Apartment Association, also the Austin Apartment Association, and eventually the Florida Apartment Association and the local associations. So I think, that's kind of a long-winded response, but that's kind of how it all came about. and, really just developing a real passion for the industry. And, I really owe a lot of it to my sister, quite frankly, who introduced me to property management many years ago.
Ron, amazing career, and people are looking up to individuals, to executives like you that made an amazing career for themselves. So I do want to ask for us and for those in audience that are watching right now,
Sure.
what are some great lessons that you learn along the way? This has been a long, fruitful journey for you, amazing journey. What are kind of the best lessons that you learn along the way that you would like to share with us here?
I think the best lesson is, obviously the relationships, that you forge, along the way. It's a very big industry, but it's a very small industry. And I think the lessons or takeaways, besides getting involved in the, local apartment associations, continuing your education, is the relationships that you forge, both on the property management side and on the vendor and supplier side. I think those, and I think, Adrian, you say it all the time, or I see it, on your postings, it's all about networking and, getting out there. You only get out of the industry what you put in. And, this is an industry that's been so good to me and my family over the past 38 years. I just constantly look for ways to give back to the industry, and it always seems to come back to me tenfold. And, so I think staying plugged in and, again, if you have the time, volunteer at your local apartment associations, get involved in the committees, whether on a local or state or national level, depending upon time constraints. The one thing that I would caution everybody is that, continue to have that work-life balance. There has to be that me time, that downtime. Take breaks, take deep breaths, but it's an exciting career. And, if you're fortunate like I am, where you get to work at a place that in an industry that you truly love, it doesn't seem like work, and people say, gosh, Ron, you work all the time. No, I'm really not working. I'm having fun. And so, once you find your passion, whether you're a painter, whether you're a carpenter, a plumber, or a property manager, you hit gold. And and it really, you really find your niche in your home, and you become really good at it because you're so passionate about it.
That, as you mentioned, like getting involved in your local association, even at the national association and advocacy, would love to hear maybe a little more about what motivated you, because obviously getting involved is very different from becoming the president of the Apartment Association of Greater Orlando and the Florida Apartment Association. So we kind of love, like, how did you get involved, and how did that progress into becoming the president with that kind of responsibility?
Well, I think it really started when, from the very, very beginning, when I sought out my NALP, and my CAM designation, I became very, fascinated by the things that I was learning on the ground were put into text. And, again, I think finding a mentor or somebody that, can sort of lead you in that direction. I'm very competitive by nature, so I have this constant, burning of being, number one and the best at everything. And I think that the way that you can do that, being new to the industry, is by, again, getting involved in a committee. And so it started out for me as a committee member of the education committee in Dallas. And eventually that turned into an invitation of, hey, Ron, would you like to instruct some of the classes? You seem to be very passionate about it. So I went and became a CAM instructor, and I taught risk management, and I still do to this very day for the Apartment Association of Greater Orlando. If you go to their website, you'll see an old picture of me, much like the one you have here. That makes me look a lot better. Where I'm on their education faculty. And, so sort of one thing led to another. You got to get involved on a committee, whether it's government affairs, whether it's legislation, whether it's membership, and I've been on all. I've been on government affairs, legislation committees, both on the local, state, and national level, where I've been an NAA delegate, I've been an alternate. And I think it's important. But you have to start somewhere. First, you got to have a burning desire and interest to be in the industry. And if you do, you're going to want to further your education. And so that was sort of the pathway for me: education, then committee involvement, then committee chairperson, and then board of directors. It's a long journey. From start to finish. I moved from Dallas to Florida in 2003. And so it took me, from 2003, well, I'll say 2004, because I moved here in October. So to be fair to myself, from the January meeting of 2004 to 2015 to become the president of Florida Apartment Association. So it's a long commitment. And you do make some personal sacrifices along the way, because most of the meetings, are held, at different locations throughout the state of Florida. And, a lot of the meetings are held in the evening, and a lot of the events are held in the evening. So it's a long haul, but I can tell you that every minute has been worth it. And again, it didn't seem like work to me, because I was having fun the entire time.
Ron, before going to the next question, I do want to say hi to everybody in the audience. We have another record number today. Thank you all for coming. I know that, you mainly came here to see Ron. Obviously, his first appearance on a podcast. I want you all to type in a quick comment, telling us where are you watching us from, and also type in your questions for Ron, please. We like to ask him questions, take questions from the audience on your behalf, and ask Ron. Ron, this has been, again, an amazing career, and you still have the passion. You still have the passion. You said you have that burning desire. What drives you to get out of bed every day? What makes you be that excited every day to do this every day and still not be tired of it after 38 years, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the drive? What's the drive?
What's the motivator? I think it's self motivation, and I think it's just seeing the results of your labor. And I think, I look forward to coming to work. I enjoy the people that I work with. I enjoy the culture that we've created at Vestico. It can be a little lonely at the top at times, but I'm surrounded myself with people that are obviously way smarter than I am. And I think that's key to any organization. And I think that we have some very talented, very dedicated, very loyal, very committed, team members within our organization. But I think it starts at the top. You have to set the example. You have to set the standard as a leader. If I'm not motivated, or I come in late, or leave early, or I take long lunches, or, I'm missing an action, things are going to start falling apart. And so I try to lead by example. And I think that's one of the things that the military taught me, the short time that I was there, is that, there is a chain of command, but you also have to lead by example. I had a client tell me the other day, he was in a war many years ago, and he's an older gentleman, and I won't say his name because he might be listening. But he always said to me, he goes, I was a captain in the Army, and he goes, and I was an infantryman, and I was the first one to lead my troops. I didn't go fight the battle. I was the one leading the charge. And I think that's really what motivates me, is that you've got to lead the charge, set the tone, be the example for everyone else to follow, be sincere and genuine. And also, be compassionate, and be passionate about what you do. And I think that it exudes in who I am and everyone that I've come in contact with. But I think more importantly is that you see the results, in your financials. You see the results in the performance of your properties. So that's really what motivates me. And again, I love what I do, so I don't look at it as work.
I love that. And I think, as you were sharing, stepping forward, showing others, being the first to take action, as they say, being the man in the arena, right? There's people who are spectators, and people who will tear you down and give you the thumbs down, but they're not the ones actually jumping in and doing it, and showing others, and being the force. So as you talk about that, if you could elaborate maybe a little bit more. We have, oftentimes a lot of the audience can be investors, there's founders, there's operators. So I think from like that leadership standpoint, when you were thinking about and building and co-founding Vesteco Real Estate, can you maybe share with us a little bit about the process you went to, maybe some of the thoughts, even fear going through your brain around co-founding a business, and then maybe some of the unique approaches you brought to that company and building that company?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You've got to have an entrepreneurial spirit about you. There's always a fear of failing. There's always going to be haters. There's always going to be sideliners, people waiting for you to fail, expecting you to fail. That's a motivator within itself, right? Because the last thing you want to do is, reach a point where you decide to hang out your own shield and create your own company. But there was so much thought, and I'll tell you, one of the things that starting Vesteco, you call it Vesteco now, I'm calling it starting Vesteco. For me, I prefer to call it Vesteco. Was a little bit risky. It was a little bit scary 7 years ago, and I would just tell you that it takes patience. It takes a lot of time. It takes dedication. But most of all, what it's really taught me is a little bit of humility. I went from working for very large companies to having very big portfolios to going out on my own and starting with one property. And when you have one property and you start your own property management business, it's a little nerve-wracking. It's a little scary because, again, you've got people watching and waiting for you to fail or close up shop, or you're having to be the president, the owner, the bookkeeper, the accountant. You're having to play all these different roles, and you're managing one property. And I think the biggest thing is you have to be patient, and you have to have your infrastructure, and you have to have the key people in place. So when the business opportunities come, you don't fail. You don't take on the business and then do a poor job, or you end up failing or letting down clients. So I think, for anybody who's listening, thinking of starting their own property management business, it's not my first rodeo. I had my own management company in Dallas, Alternative Management Group, that I established when I was 32 years old, many years ago. And, so it wasn't my first go at it. So for me, but it was a different state, and again, I went from, being working for one of the largest property management companies in the United States to basically being a property manager and an owner of a company. And, I think I took the best pieces from every company that I've ever worked for or with, the knowledge that I gained over the years. And I took all best practices and I simply applied them as my fundamental basic platform for starting my business. So, it fortunately for me, I had contacts and connections and networking. After a year or two, the business started coming in. And I think it's, a lot of people think, hey, it's just going to happen overnight. As much as you want it to, it doesn't always happen that way. So I think, humility and patience and having infrastructure and just, being patient and never give up, just never quit. And regardless of what naysayers are saying, just keep focused on the prize.
Ron, you mentioned sometimes it feels lonely at the top.
It does.
I had the same, I had the same feeling every now and then when I used to be in operations, and this wasn't such a long time ago. How do you overcome that challenge of feeling lonely at the top?
Well, you do, but fortunately for me, I interact with all of my clients, very regularly. We have meeting after meeting, as I'm sure many of you do who are listening, and I think you forge relationships, both professional and and eventually personal relationships. So I think some of that loneliness tends to go away when you have those relationships where you have those clients that trust you and interact with you, and you forge strong relationships. It's like any relationship. You go through sort of the courtship period, what I call the dating period, and then you go into an engagement period, and then eventually you get married. You know, and I think business is a lot like personal. And I tell people that all the time, you know, a business relationship takes time, you know, to cultivate, and you have to earn trust. There's got to be open communication. And eventually, some of these business relationships have turned into personal relationships. So while at times it may seem a little lonely, again, I have a great team, a great support team. You know, we have a small boutique office, you know, here in Orlando, Florida. You know, and you know, we truly act as a family. We respect one another. We trust one another. You know, we do social activities outside of work. You know, not just team building events. You know, to keep everybody's morale and you know keep everybody energized. But we actually take the time to get to know our people and spend time with them on a personal level. You know, we have parties where we invite spouses and families and kids, and we really try to get to know our employees and what really motivates them, because everybody knows everyone is motivated differently. And I think having a smaller company, and I would say, you know, what I call being a big fish in a small pond is equally as rewarding as being, you know, what I used to be, which was basically a small fish in a giant ocean. And I think it's even more gratifying and more rewarding because now I can actually interact. I know everyone's name. I say, you know, I say hi to everybody. I make it a point to shake everyone's hand and ask them how they're doing and try to get to know them on a personal level. And not everybody can do that, you know, because we're all so busy, especially those of, you know, those that work for larger companies. It's very difficult. And I know some of the regionals out there and the district managers and area managers, you know, with portfolios probably have a similar, you know, sort of, you know, synergy around their teams. But, you know, what I like about having our smaller company now is the fact that it is very family oriented. And we know that family always comes first. And I believe that in my heart and my soul. So,
I love that. You know, as you break that down, I'm sure there's some awesome stories you can share.
yeah,
We'll definitely get into. You know, and I think one of which is, you know, as you talked about going from that first property, right? You always start with one. I think like in our businesses and in the past of starting with like that first property that
right.
we had a system in. But you think about like now how large the portfolio has grown to, you know, thousands, if not tens of thousands of units across multiple states. How are you working with your team and how are you ensuring consistency, right? Whether it's consistency across the experience that residents are receiving, quality possibly with your investors of the experience, and even, you know, consistency across your employees. Like how are there certain tools you use, or how do you think about that and how do you maintain that?
Well, it's a great question, you know, and I think that obviously, you know, as our company continues to grow, you know, I will tell you that we do meet frequently, not over. We don't meet just to meet. You know, I always say, don't invite me, just invite me if you're going to ignore me at the party. I don't want to go anyways. You know, it's unlike that with our culture here. I think that, you know, again, we're not as big as some of the other companies out there, and so we have the advantage. I think we also hire like-minded people, like-minded professionals. We try to interact with our, you know, our regional managers, our district managers, you know, our executive team on a daily basis, weekly basis. So I think, you know, in terms of scalability, you know, we do manage properties in Florida and in Texas. Obviously, Texas is where I'm from, so it's easy for me to go back home. I have family there, so I try to take advantage of that. And you know, when I was in Texas, I ran properties, you know, all over the state of Texas, from Lubbock, Midland, Odessa, all the way down to San Antonio, and every city in between. So I know the state very well. And also now Florida. I've been here since 2003, so I know the state very well. But I think what really helps us, I think, keep consistent is that we hire like-minded people, but we also have, you know, a great network of previous past employees, employees that we know, employees that we've worked with. So, you know, I think having, you know, that continuity, that consistency of as I said, the like-minded employee, and interacting with them frequently. Obviously, you know, like every company, we have dashboards, you know, we have KPIs, you know, key performance indicators. we have all the reports, bells and whistles that a lot of large companies do. So we're able to look at our portfolio. But I think interacting and getting out on the real estate, one of my rules is, try to stay out on the real estate. Don't spend so much time here in the corporate office. Maybe Monday and Friday. I want you out Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I want my team out with, where the rubber meets the road, with the site personnel, and making sure that they have the tools and support they need to be successful. Because after all, when they're successful, we're all successful. And so again, I think it's just, leading by example and just making sure that, communication lines are open and that everybody has access to our policies, procedures, our handbook. They know who to call for what. So I think it all starts from the onboarding process. But, I'm pretty proud that we've had a high retention rate in terms of clients and also more so employees. And we're also mindful not to, and this is in my bio and on my website, we don't try to overload people. We don't want to spread them too thin, with a portfolio of too many different types of clients, because not every client is the same, so what may work at one property may not work at another, depending upon the business plan. So I think understanding that, what the business plan is for the particular asset, is also very important with matching personnel. So I think it's all the above. Hopefully that answers your question.
It's time to take the first question from the audience, and this comes from Shazia Razak. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your last name properly. What do you miss about larger companies? She's referring about the larger companies that you work for in the past.
The pay. Yeah, the bonuses. That's one of the things as an owner and as an entrepreneur. I mentioned humility. When I started my company in 2017, I took a big pay cut and haven't given myself very many raises. I've accepted no bonuses. I'm taking all the profits of the company and putting it back into the business and back into infrastructure and back into hiring key personnel, again, that are smarter than I am. And so I think it's been an adjustment. But, I think jokingly, I say hey, but I think there's not much that I really miss about working for a large company, because sometimes when you work for a large company, and I hope I don't offend anybody by saying this, but it's very hard for somebody who's as driven as I am or as competitive as I am to be able to excel in their career, because there's so many bidding for the same position and job. And so what I love about having a small company and working for a small company, and I've worked for other small companies early in my career in Dallas, is that as that company grew, so did I. And the opportunities presented themselves much quicker. And whereas if I worked for a larger company, those opportunities, at least locally, may not have presented themselves as quick.
Yeah, there's I think, like, you think about young professionals too getting in the industry, and there's so many options of places to go. And I think about, like, my history when I was getting out of college, like, oh, you got to study this, you got to do this, you got to go that direction. And now there's a whole different viewpoint. And so I want to get your take on maybe some advice. There was a question about advice you'd give to these young professionals as, do you think more the generalist approach? Do you think more to be successful in the property management and real estate world, and especially as you think about your organization, do you like to go more the generalist route? Do you recommend they be more focused and niche? And then what advice do you have to young people about thinking about a career path?
That's a great question. And being as old as I am and as long as I've been in the business, it's more than half of my life that I've been in the business. And, the advice I would give is, and this goes for anyone, whether you have it, I read a lot of books and, a lot of leadership books, as you can imagine, and part of a lot of leadership groups on LinkedIn and other social media. And, you constantly see all those taglines about hiring for, different reasons other than, work history. you hire for, somebody who's eager to learn the business rather than, you can always train, and you can train a skill. In other words, my advice would be, I don't think that we follow any necessarily, old school train of thought of, the way that I came up, you've got to be a leasing agent. Look, somebody gave me an opportunity in 1986. I didn't have any experience. I had a little bit of retail background. I worked at Joski's, which eventually got bought out by Dillard's. And, as a teenager, selling men's slacks at the North Park Mall in Dallas in 1983, while I was in high school. So my experience was retail and being in the United States Air Force, which really didn't qualify me for being a leasing professional in the industry. But I think, if you have sales ability, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go from leasing to assistant to manager. And that's something that we talked about even at the big companies that I work for. It's a sort of the succession path. It doesn't necessarily have to be that I go from leasing to manager. You might go from leasing to IT. You might go from leasing to marketing. You might, so I really think that, we always think of leasing as sort of the entry level position in our industry. That's not always necessarily true. So I think that old way, or that old school thought of you've got to have a leasing experience, or you've got to have a system manager experience, today doesn't necessarily apply if you have somebody who has the aptitude, and the other strengths, besides the work history. And I think that you can bring them in and train them, and then cross-train them, and even put them in different roles or positions that they may have an interest in within your organization. There are many people that I've hired over my 38-year career, that are presidents of company and vice presidents of companies, and nothing makes me more happier, or nothing, every time I see these promotions on LinkedIn, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I used to work with that person back, 20 years ago when they were a leasing agent fresh out of college, or, and now I see him as director of asset management at one of the, top 50 NMHC companies. And nothing makes me feel better than seeing people do well in our industry, which includes our competitor group, and I just think it's so gratifying. But I think, really, to answer your question, we don't really have a specific rule or qualifier. We'll interview anyone who's interested and get to know them, and and show them the opportunities that we have in our industry, because we have so many various departments that they might fit in and do really well at. So I think that's there's not one size fits all at Vestico, that's for sure.
Ron, I want to ask you a question about the business, about you building Vestico. You said you started with one property, and if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I am mistaken, you're managing now 15,000 apartment homes. Is that correct?
No, that's I wish that's our goal. No, I would say that over the past 7 years, we have managed that many communities. Currently, we do not manage that many communities. We have various types of owners, syndicators, private owners. We have we have families that own properties now. So we have a very mixed, clientele. Yes, over the past 7 years, we've managed as many as 15,000 units. But at present, we do not manage near that amount. And I think that majority of what we're seeing is it's cyclical, like any business, like our industry. I've been through so many real estate cycles, over the past 38 years. I've seen the ups and downs. I've seen the worst of the worst in the 80s, and after 9/11, I've seen probably the worst of the worst in my career. But to answer your question, yeah, we definitely have the infrastructure to be able to grow to that capacity. But we're currently not operating at that level today. We had many properties that were sold, pre and post pandemic. We've got a lot of investors where their loans are maturing. They put on, short 3-year bridge loans, interest only. The hedges are expiring. The cap rate hedges are expiring. So it's cyclical. We'll see, probably we'll maintain around 7,500 units. And then we'll dip down to 5,000, and then we'll go back up to 10, and then we'll come down to 75. So I think it's really based on the whole period and when the relationship starts with the client, depending upon that client's business plan. So, we obviously have we're very fortunate that we have clients that have long-term hold, where they're going into family trust and things of that nature, sort of as our foundation now. So, even if every client sold, we still have several clients that will never sell under any circumstances. That will always be our foundation and our base. So we're a safe, solid company.
Going back to creating something from one property to thousands of apartment homes, scaling. I want to ask you about scaling. I'm a first-time entrepreneur. I'm not at that point, right, to think about scaling. I'm just getting started. But many in the audience are really curious. How do you go from one property to thousands, to 7, to 8, to 5, to 10,000 apartment homes? What are the challenges, and how do you overcome? How do you plan? How do you overcome, challenges of scaling?
Well, again, the challenge is making sure that you have the right infrastructure, right? You have to lay the foundation. And so for the first 2 years of owning and operating my own business, I had literally one property. And, I started doing consulting work, for another group, and they had 20 properties. And then I started doing consulting for another group, and they had 5 or 6 properties. And eventually over time, cultivating and developing that relationship, they had enough trust in me to where I no longer had to be a consultant, and it gave me the time that I needed to be able to build the already existing infrastructure that I had in order to take down these properties and, effectively manage them in a way that they needed to be operated. So I think it's all about timing. And, you always have to be hiring. One piece of advice I will tell you, always be networking, always be hiring and recruiting, because you'll never know when that person that you met, wherever it was, might become your next regional, might become your next, accounting manager, our accounts payable person, your IT person, whatever. And I think the more that you network and the more that you keep in mind that you always need to be hiring in the back of your mind, that day will come where you'll reach out to that person that you've met and you'll be extending an offer. And the good thing about our industry is that we have a little bit of time to prepare. So most properties don't come at you if you're starting to start your own property management. They won't just show up tomorrow and say, I've got 20 properties. You have a little bit of time, and typically, not a lot of time, but you do have some time. Generally, as a general rule, we think of ourselves to some degree as, a third party contractor, because quite frankly, PMCs, private, property management companies, are a third party contractor. I remind my staff that, as quickly as you can change your landscaper, as quickly as you can change your pest control company with a 30-day notice, so can our client send us a 30-day notice of termination. And, fortunately, that hasn't happened too many times, and for us. But, I think, and that's kind of how it all came about. It was just humility, patience. Some days I was, frustrated and ready to throw in the towel, but, I talked myself out of it. There were times that even my own wife said, well, why don't you go back to work for one of these big companies? They all love you. You can make great money. And what I said? Well, then I wouldn't be home every night. And you know what? I'd be working long hours and I'd be doing it for someone else. And, at some point, I was just getting tired of making everybody else look good and making everybody else rich. And, I know that sounds terrible to some degree, but, I think that, and then now my wife says, well, you're the boss. Why don't you leave work early? Well, I'm not the boss. Now I have my entire corporate team and I have, 20 clients that are my bosses. So in essence, back to the question of, what do I miss about my company or working for a big company? Well, there I only had, one or two bosses. Now I have 30. So, when it's your name, on the door, it's serious, and so you got to really take it serious, and you really can't take advantage of the luxury. Even if I could leave, again, going back to my competitiveness and my lead by example, I wouldn't take advantage of that because I wouldn't want my team to become demotivated by my lack of effort or presence.
I love that. Having a consistent drive and passion and things to look forward to. People always ask, and when someone sells a business or is successful, why do they still work? And it's like, well,
Right.
You're always looking forward to the next thing. And if you're passionate about it, it's your baby, right? It's what you
That's
care
right.
most about. Really, really love that kind of in-depth thinking behind the scenes. I think one thing we'd love to know is, looking ahead, as you talk about, I'm sure, and I've been getting some advice recently from some leaders in the industry who have seen, as you said, cycles and have their names on the building and on the business, and they're thinking about legacy. Maybe you want to share a little bit. I'd love to kind of hear what your long-term aspirations, long-term goals for Vestico, and as you're thinking about, we all, whether it's handing the torch over to the next generation or the next team, how do you think about that? How do you think about legacy, and what do you have any secrets you can share with us about what you think of as your goal for the company?
Well, I think, my main goal for the company, and always has been, is to provide a great place to work, a place where people can feel proud. I've always said that, when we're doing these annual reviews with our team members, there should never be any surprises, ever. And if we're effectively communicating with our team, there should never be any surprises. So I use as an example, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not planning on retiring or going anywhere. I see myself working for the next 20 years. So I know I have 4 sons. None of them are interested in taking over Vestico. So unfortunately, they've all went in different directions, and I applaud that. Everybody has their own interests. But I hope my legacy is that, when I'm gone or retired or no longer able to get to work, whether it's in a wheelchair or by Uber, whoever's picking me up to take me to work, I hope that people can look back and say, I had a really great experience at Vestico, and I learned a lot from a great guy that really cares about his people. And, I always encourage people to, to get involved in the industry, in the committees, and to further their education. We pay for their education. We support it. We allow them time. When I started in the industry, I had to pay for my own education. The company I work for did not support it financially, and a lot of the, classes that I had to take were evenings and weekends. And so, it was my time, and but it was money and time well invested. I think that, we certainly don't want to be, the biggest company. That's not why we're here. We just want to create a property management company that people can look back and be proud of. And I always say, if there ever comes a day when any of my team members, either dread my phone call or my visit, then there's a problem. And, I want to know what that problem is, and we want to, help keep the culture that we have intact and not grow so big that we become disconnected as a family, because we all know that distance, whether it's, in a personal relationship, having a long distance relationship, or having a corporate, long distance relationship, certainly has an effect on our relationship. So I think our goal is, to never exceed 25,000 units, nationwide. And, I think we're on a trajectory to get there in the next 5 years. And, but that's not our number one goal. My number one goal is to make sure that, everyone who's here now has a place, and that we're continuing to hire and recruit and retain the top quality candidates that we have, and continue to cultivate and expand their knowledge through investing in our team members.
I'd like to take another question from the audience now, and we have a question from Angel Anthony. He's asking, how is Vesteco leveraging technology and innovation to improve operations and resident experience? I am curious on how companies are changing with now AI being introduced into the mix.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate that question very much. Because we're a smaller company, we do have similar products that some of the larger companies do. I will tell you that there are much larger companies who have larger, deeper pockets, and obviously more capital to deploy at at that new product. I will tell you though, even as we we are, I wouldn't say at the cutting edge, but we're certainly at the grassroots level of introducing AI. We've rolled out revenue management, like the rest of the big companies, using products like Guildstar, I'll use that name, and AIRM, and I've experienced LRO as well. And so I think revenue optimization was sort of the first launch. But to answer your question more specifically with AI, I think for us, given our size and our youth of our company, we just now started integrating AI, and I see AI as an extension, as a time saver, certainly in certain aspects of what we do. We launched a product recently, which is an AI piece of one of our property management our software companies, that's going to help augment what I would consider an augmentation of the leasing team, and operating a 24-hour, AI response for leads, for example. So we have already deployed that. It's already been deployed, and it's working quite nicely, and it is a time saver. I will say, unlike, and I hate to use Elon's name on a podcast, probably get in trouble. I don't know that we're ready to let our car drive by itself yet. I think we're just not there yet. And I don't think that, and there might be many people that will disagree with me, I don't think we can take the human factor out of what we do today. I think people expect to see people in the office to interact with. I think people still enjoy social activities, social events. I still think people enjoy seeing people in the office and saying hello and being greeted with a smile. So I think we're at the very early stages of it. But who knows? Maybe someday, you may walk in the leasing office at one of your apartment communities, and you might you might have to talk to a kiosk or a robot. I don't know. You never know. But I don't think we're there as a company quite yet. I don't know if the industry, there may be other companies that have, way further advanced than we are in the AI space. But I think we're just kind of scratching the surface right now as a company. So will it ever take over the human component of property management? I would say probably not, but certainly there are benefits to having it, and it's been proven, and I can see it. It does save time, but I don't know that it's quite ready to take over the maintenance position at a property quite yet.
Yeah, that was definitely a hot topic in San Diego at NMHC of different people sharing, like if they were, having teams on site or off site, the challenges. And I heard multiple saying, to your point, we're in the hospitality business, right? We really are. This is where people live. And if we just remove all the people, well, then, people are probably going to go somewhere better, right? So to that point, I'd love to get your take, as you're talking about technology, you're talking about where the trends are moving, what you're looking at. How do you as a team, because you're obviously, you running different companies, you think like an entrepreneur, you're thinking about innovation, you're thinking about the tools you talked about to give to your teams to make them better. How do you make these decisions on which tools to say no to for now, which tools to pilot, and then which tools to roll out, and over what period? Could you take us into maybe some of your decision making, how your team thinks about that?
Yeah, and I think that we use the big box approach just like any large company, to your point. I think, I personally, have been inundated with requests for meetings. I mean, I probably get 10 or 15 a day from different companies from California to New York about these new hot products and these new products that are designed to basically, increase efficiencies through artificial intelligence and technology. Whether it's outsourcing your accounting to, a foreign country, for example, or, outsourcing, your AI or your IT department. I mean, I'm literally inundated by those. I'm sure you are too. I see you're shaking your head, Chris. I think we use the same approach. We go to the people that are in our space and not necessarily startup companies. And so hopefully I don't disrespect anybody who's in a venture startup, company by saying that. But we typically like to stay, kind of within when we vet our, call it our, property management software systems support companies, whether it's, some of the bigger ones, and I won't name any names, but you know who they are. I think it's important that whoever we're talking to is already in our space and that they kind of understand, what it is we do on a daily basis before we even entertain, a 30-minute or an hour Zoom meeting, an intro on their product. They've got to have some history in the real estate market and property management or in the hospitality industry, as you mentioned, before we'll even entertain a meeting. And then naturally we will test it as the corporate office and, ask and answer all questions, and we will pilot that product on a property or two, maybe in 2 different states and 2 different product types, and then get the feedback from, the on-site team. And it's very honest, open, and objective feedback. Is this really a good product as they claim? Is it really saving you time as they claim? And does it really make sense? I say it to my advertisers all the time. I said, it's one thing to drive leads to my property, but I need leases. And so, cost per lead is one thing, but to me, at the end of the day, it's cost per lease. And if it's really helping, and, I think one of the things about deploying software as a company and as a corporate office, having worked for 2 of the largest property management companies in the United States, and the largest management company in the United States, oftentimes we as executives will sit around and we'll get, a pitch from a new product and we'll think, oh, this is great, this is wonderful. But then we don't even think of how it's really going to impact the end user. And is it going to create more work or is it going to create less work? And that's really what we all need to be mindful of. Is it really, and you also have to look at who's running your property, who are you piloting? You have to remember that there's old guys like me still running property management companies that may not have, the same skill set or, the same aptitude or skill. I'd say speed. We have the aptitude. I would say the speed to embrace change and new technology. So people tend to have a fear of what they don't know or understand. So I think as long as the product is proven and it's deployed correctly and people embrace it and they understand it, they're not afraid of it, they use it, and they can actually see the benefit rather than adding another administrative burden or something they're afraid of and then they won't use or touch. So I think when we pilot programs, try to pick different, product types, but also different management type of people to be able to gauge whether or not, they're going to embrace it and use it, and if it's going to be effective or not.
Ron, it's been so amazing to have you here. I could have gone for hours,
Yeah, me
honestly.
too.
Unfortunately, we have to, the podcast is coming to an end. So I wanted to ask you to share some final thoughts with us and the audience before we wrap up.
Well, I think some final thoughts is, if I can do it, you can do it. And it really, it just takes passion. You gotta love what you do what you love. I know that sounds so cliche-ish, but once you find that, thing, whatever it is that you love, you're gonna do great. You're gonna excel at it because, again, for me, it's not like work. This is what I love. This is what I do. It's my passion. It's like a painter, with a paintbrush and a canvas that creates art. And that's what I look at our property managers as, these artists that all they need to be given is a clean canvas, some paint and a paintbrush, and let them create the art. And all we do is provide, the tools and support so that they're successful. And that's really all all it boils down to. Whatever industry you're in, whatever field you're in, whether you're a porter or whether you're a plumber or a maintenance technician, find whatever it is you're passionate about and give it everything. And just remember, you only get out what you put in.
I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up this conversation. Thank you again, Ron.
Yeah,
Very grateful to have you here today. We hope to get you back here for another conversation down the road. There's just so much more that I wanted to talk to you about. I want to thank all of you in the audience. We broke another record today, like by a lot. It's been an amazing turnout. And I want to thank our sponsors from Apartment Snapshot, Kairos Water, and GPS Roof Leak Repairs for making this podcast possible. We hope to see you guys back next week. We have Christine Monikop. She is a vice president of Gables Residential as the next guest. So come back next Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern for another amazing multifamily hangout. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.